Long before any trainer ever walked the roads of Hoenn with a backpack full of Pokeballs, before gyms and badges and bustling cities, the region was a much quieter place, not empty, but raw, untamed. A world where the ocean felt closer to the sky, where forests stretched without interruption, and where mountains rose like jagged bones from the earth. If you could stand at the edge of that ancient Hoenn and listen, you wouldn't hear music from a town or the chatter of travelers. You'd hear wind, water, distant thunder, the slow shifting of a world that was still deciding what it wanted to become. And in that ancient world, there were forces so enormous that calling them Pokémon almost feels too small of a word. Not because they weren't Pokémon because they were, but because they were also something else. They were living natural laws. They were the sea, the land, and the sky given shape and instinct. The weather trio, Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza. The story of Hoenn in many ways begins with them. To understand why, it helps to picture Hoenn as a region that has always lived between two extremes. It's a place of bright sunlight and sudden rainstorms, of calm shorelines and violent currents, of volcanoes and underwater trenches. Hoenn is a region where nature is never fully domesticated, even in modern times. There are routes where the rain falls so hard you can barely see the next step. There are caves that hum with heat, and ocean paths that stretch wide and open like a second sky. That balance between land and sea, between expansion and restraint, has always been fragile. And long ago, when the world was younger, that balance was broken. In the oldest legends, Kyogre is described as the great Pokémon of the sea, the one who expanded the oceans, the one who brought rain and storms and endless waves. Kyogre isn't simply a creature that lives in the water. It is water in the way that myths describe gods as being their element. When Kyogre moves, the sea responds. When it breathes, clouds gather. When it awakens, the world becomes wetter, darker, heavier with rainfall. Groudon, on the other hand, is described as the great Pokémon of the land, the one who raised continents, the one who brought drought and sunlight and scorching heat. Groudon doesn't just walk on the earth, it shapes it. It forces the land upward, like something being pushed from below, lifting new ground out of the sea, carving space for mountains and deserts and valleys. And Rayquaza is different. Rayquaza doesn't belong to the ocean or the earth. Rayquaza belongs to the space between them, the open sky, the endless air, the high atmosphere where storms are born and where sunlight is filtered into something gentler. Rayquaza is often described as a protector, but not in the soft sense. It doesn't protect by cuddling the world into safety. It protects by enforcing balance, by intervening when the natural order is threatened by forces too large to coexist peacefully. Rayquaza is the sky's answer to chaos. In the oldest Hoenn stories, the first great conflict began when Kyogre and Groudon both awakened at the same time. The reason is never fully explained in a simple way, and that's part of what makes it feel like a real myth. Some legends suggest it was inevitable, that the sea and land will always struggle because they both want space. Water wants to spread and cover. Land wants to rise and remain. In the real world, coastlines shift slowly over centuries. In the Pokémon world, that shift is personified into two living beings with instincts powerful enough to reshape the planet. Kyogre and Groudon did not argue in words. They argued in weather. They argued in tides and drought. They argued in storms that swallowed the horizon and heat waves that turned rivers thin. When Kyogre surged, rain poured from the sky in sheets. The sea climbed higher, waves swallowing low ground, coastlines disappearing beneath churning water. Islands became smaller, beaches vanished, forests flooded, and everywhere the ocean expanded, the world became cold and wet and heavy, like the sky itself was pressing down. When Growldawn surged, the opposite happened. The clouds broke apart, sunlight poured down, sharp and relentless. The air dried, water evaporated from the surface, the land cracked, new ground rose where ocean had been, like the world's bones pushing upward. The heat was so intense that the very idea of rain felt distant and impossible. It wasn't simply two Pokémon fighting. It was the world being pulled in two directions at once. And as their conflict grew, Hoenn became a battleground for forces far beyond anything humans could stop. In these legends, people were small, not unimportant, but powerless in the face of gods made of sea and land. Imagine standing on a cliff and watching the ocean rise unnaturally fast, swallowing the shoreline in minutes. Imagine watching the sky turn dark with storm clouds, only for those clouds to be ripped apart by a wave of heat, leaving behind an empty blue that feels almost cruel. That was ancient Hoenn's nightmare, a world that could not decide if it wanted to drown or burn. But even in the middle of this, humans did what humans always do when faced with something too large to fight. They tried to understand it. They tried to name it. They tried to build stories around it, because stories are one of the only ways to hold chaos in your hands without being destroyed by it. And so the myths began. Somewhere in the history of Hoenn, there were people who looked at Kyogre and Growldawn and didn't see monsters. They saw forces of creation, because in a way, both of them were creators. Kyogre's rain fed life. Water brought growth. Oceans carried fish and currents and endless ecosystems. Growldawn's land made homes possible. Earth gave space for forests and fields and mountains. Without land, there is nowhere to stand. The problem wasn't that one was evil and one was good. The problem was that both were too absolute. A world of only Kyogre would become endless sea. A world of only Growldawn would become endless desert. Life needs both, and that's where Rayquaza's legend begins to take shape. Rayquaza is said to live high above, in the ozone layer, far beyond where most creatures can reach. It drifts through the upper sky like a living comet, watching the world below. In modern Hoenn, Rayquaza is associated with the Sky Pillar, an ancient tower that reaches upward toward the heavens, like a needle trying to touch the sky itself. But long before the Sky Pillar became a place trainers could visit, it was a symbol that humans believed connected them to the sky's guardian. In the old stories, when Kyogre and Growldawn's battle threatened to tear the world apart, Rayquaza descended. And the way the legends describe it is always dramatic, because it would have been. Imagine a sky that's been filled with storms for days. Then suddenly the clouds begin to twist, not into a tornado, but into a spiral, as if something massive is cutting through them. The wind changes direction. The air feels electric. The rain stops not because it runs out, but because it is commanded to stop. Then you see it. A long green shape coiling through the sky like a serpent made of emerald light. Yellow markings like ancient symbols. Eyes that look older than mountains. Rayquaza doesn't roar like a beast. Rayquaza roars like the sky itself cracking. And when Rayquaza appears, Kyogre and Growldawn are forced to stop. That's the key detail in almost every version of the myth. Rayquaza is the only one that can end their conflict, not by defeating them permanently, but by suppressing them, by reminding them that the world cannot survive their endless war. Rayquaza's presence is described like a pressure, like the atmosphere becomes heavier, and even gods of sea and land must obey the law of balance. So Kyogre retreats, Growldawn retreats, and the world, exhausted, begins to recover. This is the moment where Hoen's ancient people would have felt the most relief. The rain slows to normal, rivers return, the sun becomes warm instead of scorching, coastlines stabilize. The world stops swinging wildly between flood and drought, and after the battle ends, the myths say Kyogre and Growlithe enter a long slumber, not because they were killed, not because they were tamed, but because the world needed peace. In Pokemon lore, slumber is often how legendary Pokemon pause themselves. It's like a safety mechanism. Their power is too great to remain active without consequence, so they sleep deep underwater, deep beneath the earth, hidden away where their presence won't disturb the world's balance. Kyogre's slumber is often associated with the depths of the sea, in a place so deep that sunlight can't reach it. A trench, a cavern, a watery prison that is also a sanctuary. Growlithe's slumber is often associated with deep underground, in a place filled with heat and ancient stone. A chamber beneath the earth, surrounded by pressure and magma and silence, and Rayquaza returns to the sky. Not sleeping in the same way, but withdrawing, watching, waiting, because in the Weather Trio's story, peace is never permanent, it's only maintained, it's only guarded. Now, in the world of modern Hoenn, these myths are remembered in different ways depending on where you go. Some people treat them like bedtime stories, some treat them like sacred history, some treat them like warnings. The kind of story parents tell their children not just to entertain them, but to remind them that nature is bigger than any person. And those myths didn't just stay in words. They became places. They became ruins. They became symbols carved into stone. In Hoenn, there are ancient relics and inscriptions that hint at the Weather Trio's past. There are weathered structures that seem too old to belong to any modern city. There are traditions passed down through certain groups, especially those connected to the sky and the sea. One of the most important of these traditions belongs to the Draconid people. The Draconids are an ancient clan in Hoenn associated with dragon Pokemon and the worship, or at least reverence, of Rayquaza. Their story becomes far more important later, but even in the earliest timeline, they represent something crucial. Humans who believed the sky had a guardian, and that guardian could be called upon when the world was in danger. That idea is powerful, because it means that even in a world where Kyogre and Groudon can reshape continents, humans still found a way to matter. Not by overpowering nature, but by respecting it, by learning its patterns, by preserving knowledge, by remembering what happened the last time the world nearly drowned or burned. And so, over centuries, Hoenn developed into the region we know, a place where land and sea exist in a delicate, beautiful tension. A region with wide oceans and many islands, but also strong land masses and mountains. A region where rain can fall hard, but the sun can still shine bright. And that someday, when humans grow bold, curious, or careless enough to disturb what should remain undisturbed, the Weather Trio will awaken again. After the ancient clash between Kyogre and Groudon finally ended, Hoenn entered a stretch of time so quiet that it almost felt unreal compared to the chaos that came before it. The storms faded back into ordinary weather, the kind of rain that nourishes forests instead of swallowing them, and the sunlight softened into something warm instead of punishing. Coastlines stopped shifting violently. Rivers returned to their usual curves. The land stopped cracking open from relentless heat. The sea stopped climbing like it wanted to reclaim everything. Slowly, the world settled into a version of balance that felt stable enough for life to grow without fear of being erased overnight. As generations passed, that balance became the new normal. People built homes where it had once been too dangerous to settle. Small fishing villages formed along the shore, taking advantage of calm tides and reliable currents. Inland, Farms expanded into fields that would have been impossible during the age of drought and flood. Roads appeared, connecting distant communities that used to feel separated by wilderness. Over time, those roads became trade routes, and those trade routes became the foundation for cities. Hoenn began to feel less like a mythic landscape ruled by primal forces and more like a region shaped by human hands and everyday routines. But even while modern life grew louder and more confident, the world beneath it never truly forgot what had happened. Kyogre still slept, sealed away in the deepest parts of the ocean where sunlight could not reach. Growldawn still slept, buried far underground where stone and heat pressed in from every direction. Their slumber wasn't the peaceful kind of sleep that comes after a long day. It was a heavy, unnatural stillness, like a lid placed on something too powerful to remain awake. It was the kind of sleep that exists for the world's safety, because if those ancient beings ever rose again at full strength, the land and sea would begin their war all over. Rayquaza, unlike the other two, did not sink into the earth or vanish into the ocean. It remained above, high in the atmosphere where few creatures could even survive, drifting through the upper sky like a silent guardian. In the oldest Hoenn traditions, Rayquaza was not simply a third legendary Pokémon, it was the balance itself. The one force capable of stopping Kyogre and Growldawn when their conflict threatened to destroy everything. It wasn't a ruler in the human sense, and it wasn't a hero either. It was more like a law of nature given form, appearing only when the world was pushed too far out of alignment. As the centuries rolled forward, the great clash between sea and land became a legend instead of a memory. People still told stories about it, but the stories changed, shaped the way myths always do. Some versions made Kyogre a furious ocean god that punished the land. Some versions made Growldawn a wrathful earth titan that scorched the world out of jealousy. Some versions painted Rayquaza as a divine savior, descending from the heavens to protect humanity. And in quiet villages, you could still find elders who spoke of the Weather Trio with a kind of reverence that felt less like storytelling and more like warning, as if they believed that saying the names too loudly might wake something that should remain asleep. Those myths didn't remain only in spoken words. Over time, they became part of the landscape itself. Ruins appeared in remote places, worn down by rain and wind until they looked like natural stone formations. Ancient carvings could be found in caves, their symbols faded but still recognizable, like someone long ago wanted to leave proof that these forces were real. And in certain places, the architecture of old Hoenn hinted at something deeper than ordinary civilization. It suggested that people once built not only to live, but to prepare, as if they believed balance was something that had to be protected by more than hope. One of the most important of these ancient locations was the Sky Pillar, a towering structure that rises into the air like a needle pointed toward the heavens. Even in modern times, it feels out of place, as if it belongs to a different age entirely. The Sky Pillar is more than a landmark. It's a symbol of Rayquaza's authority, a reminder that the sky has its own guardian, and that the world's balance can be restored when everything begins to fall apart. The tower's existence implies that ancient people didn't just fear the Weather Trio. They understood them. They believed that Rayquaza could be called upon, not as a weapon, but as the final answer when the sea and land refused to coexist. This is where the Draconid people become important, even long before most trainers ever hear their name. The Draconids are an ancient clan tied closely to dragon Pokémon and to the legends of Rayquaza. They were not the kind of group that sought fame or conquest. They were keepers of knowledge, protectors of old traditions that others might forget. In later Hoenn history, their role becomes clearer, But even in this quieter era, you can imagine them living with a kind of patient awareness, preserving stories that other people treated like bedtime tales. They understood that Kyogre and Groudon were not villains to be defeated. They were natural forces, and the only true solution was balance. For a long time, that balance held. Hoenn became known for its beauty, its mix of ocean routes and forest paths, its volcanic mountains and calm seaside towns. It was a region where nature still felt close, but not hostile. People traveled freely, trainers explored caves, and crossed waters without fearing that the world itself might turn against them. And because things felt stable, the old legends became easier to dismiss. When a disaster hasn't happened in hundreds or thousands of years, it starts to feel impossible. It starts to feel like something that belongs to a different world entirely. But humans have a habit of becoming bold when they feel safe. As Hoenn modernized, technology advanced, ships grew larger, and traveled farther out into open water. Diving equipment improved, allowing explorers to reach depths that had once been unreachable. Mining operations dug deeper into mountains, chasing rare minerals and ancient secrets hidden in stone. Research labs expanded, studying the ocean's currents and the Earth's crust, mapping what had once been unknown. And with every step forward, humans unknowingly moved closer to places that had been sealed away for a reason. At first, the signs were small. A fisherman might notice tides behaving strangely for a few days, not enough to cause panic, but enough to feel unsettling. A sailor might speak of unusually violent storms appearing far out at sea, storms that didn't match the season. A hiker might feel tremors beneath their feet, tiny shakes that rattled stones loose from a cliffside. A farmer might complain that the air felt drier than it should, that the heat lingered too long even after sunset. These weren't obvious warnings. They were whispers, the kind of subtle shifts that most people would ignore because life is busy and the world always has minor changes. But those whispers mattered, because Kyogre and Groudon were not separate from the world's weather. Their power wasn't something they had to actively use to affect nature. Their very existence was tied to it. Even in slumber, they were connected to the ocean and the land like deep roots, and when something disturbed the seals that held them, it was like tapping on the surface of a sleeping giant. The giant might not wake immediately, but it would stir, and that stirring would ripple outward into tides, storms, heat waves, and tremors. This is where the ancient relics of Hoenn become more than myth. In the Weather Trio's story, two objects hold enormous significance: the blue orb and the red orb. These are not ordinary artifacts. They are described as ancient keys, relics tied directly to Kyogre and Groudon. They resonate with the power of the sea and the land, acting like catalysts that can call those forces back into motion. In a region filled with modern technology, the orbs feel almost supernatural, as if they were crafted in an era when people understood primal energy more deeply than they ever could with machines. The dangerous thing about relics like these is that they invite obsession. To most people, they are ancient treasures, valuable because they are rare and old. To scientists, they are mysteries, objects that might reveal secrets about energy and evolution. But to certain groups, they become something else entirely. They become tools. They become proof that the world can be changed, reshaped, redesigned, and that belief is where the true danger begins. Because it's one thing to find a relic and admire it, but it's another thing entirely to believe you can use it to control a force that once nearly destroyed the region. In modern Hoenn, two organizations rise out of this growing ambition, and they do so with beliefs that sound almost reasonable at first glance. Team Aqua believes the world is becoming too dominated by humans, that oceans are being polluted, that nature is being pushed back by cities and roads. In their minds, expanding the sea would restore balance by giving marine Pokémon more space to thrive. Team Magma believes the opposite, that too much of the planet is wasted on ocean, that humans and land Pokémon could flourish if there were more continents, more habitable ground. They see the sea as excess and the land as potential. Both groups claim they want to improve the world. Both believe they are acting for a greater good, and both share the same fatal flaw. They think the weather trio can be awakened and controlled. They imagine Kyogre as a tool to flood the world into a new paradise, or Groudon as a tool to raise land into a new future. They speak about nature like it is something that can be commanded, like a machine that can be switched on and directed toward a goal. They do not understand that Kyogre and Groudon are not machines, and they are not pets. They are the sea and the land themselves, and when they awaken, they do not ask what humans want. The world, during this calm before the crisis, is like a sleeping creature of its own. Everything appears peaceful on the surface, but deep below, ancient power waits. The ocean is quiet, but in the deepest trenches, something stirs. The mountains stand still, but beneath them, heat shifts and pressure builds. The sky looks clear, but far above, Rayquaza drifts unseen, a silent presence that will not intervene until the moment balance truly breaks. And humans, confident in their cities and their progress, move closer and closer to the point where they will touch something they cannot handle. Because in the Weather Trio timeline, disaster doesn't arrive like a sudden lightning strike. It builds slowly, like clouds gathering far out on the horizon. It starts as a rumor, a strange report, an unexplained tremor. It becomes an unusual storm pattern, a stretch of relentless heat, a sea that feels restless. And eventually, it becomes the moment someone holds the red orb or the blue orb in their hands and believes they are holding power they can control. And once that happens, the long sleep ends, whether the world is ready or not. At first, it doesn't feel like the end of the world is coming. That's one of the strange things about Hoenn's Weather Trio timeline. When Kyogre and Groudon begin to stir again, the region doesn't instantly collapse into chaos. There's no single dramatic moment where the sky splits open and everyone immediately understands what's happening. Instead, the change arrives the way real disasters often do, slowly, quietly, and with just enough subtlety that most people convince themselves it's nothing. A few days of heavier rain than usual, a stretch of heat that lingers longer than it should, a storm that rolls in at the wrong time of year, a river that runs higher, or a coastline that feels like it's crept forward. And if you live your life inside routines, those things are easy to ignore. Weather is weather. Seasons shift. Nature can be unpredictable. That's what people tell themselves, because it's comforting to believe that nothing is wrong. Comforting to believe that the world is stable, that the land beneath your feet is permanent, and that the ocean will stay where it belongs. But in Hoenn, the weather is never just weather, not when Kyogre and Groudon exist. Not when ancient power is tied directly into the sky and sea and earth, because somewhere out there, beyond the reach of ordinary people, the seals that kept the world balanced are beginning to loosen. The long sleep is becoming lighter, and the first ones to notice it aren't always scientists or heroes. Sometimes it's sailors, sometimes it's fishermen, sometimes it's people who spend their whole lives watching the horizon, noticing when the ocean breathes differently than it did yesterday. In the coastal cities, people start talking about the sea feeling restless. The waves come in harder. The wind changes direction suddenly. There's a heaviness in the air, like a storm waiting just out of sight. On the open routes between islands, sailors whisper about clouds that gather too quickly and rain that falls with a strange persistence as if it doesn't want to stop. In the inland areas, people begin to complain about heat. Not the normal kind of summer warmth, but a dryness that feels wrong. The sun seems harsher, the air feels thin. Even when the sky is clear, it doesn't feel peaceful. It feels tense, like the world is holding its breath. And all of this is happening before anyone even touches the orbs. Because the orbs are not the beginning, they are the trigger. They are the key that turns the lock. But the lock has been waiting for a long time. In the modern era of Hoenn, Team Aqua and Team Magma are already moving through the region like shadows. They aren't just groups of random troublemakers. They are organizations with structure, with leaders, with resources, and with a shared obsession that makes them dangerous. They don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as the only ones brave enough to do what must be done. Team Aqua looks at Hoenn's oceans and believes the world is supposed to be more water than land. They believe the seas are the true home of life, and that humans have stolen too much space from nature. In their eyes, flooding the world isn't destruction, it's correction. It's giving the planet back to the ocean and the Pokémon that belong there. Team Magma looks at the same world and believes the opposite. They see the oceans as wasted space, a massive stretch of water that could be turned into land where humans and land Pokémon can thrive. They believe expanding the continents would create a better future. In their eyes, raising land isn't disaster, it's opportunity. Both teams are built on the same kind of dangerous confidence, the belief that the world is a problem that can be solved, the belief that nature can be rewritten like a plan on paper, and most importantly, the belief that Kyogre or Groudon can be awakened and controlled. That's what makes the red orb and blue orb so important, because they aren't just ancient treasures, they are tools in the wrong hands. In the Ruby and Sapphire era, the story begins to tighten around these objects. Team Magma seeks the red orb, the relic tied to Groudon, believing it will awaken the land titan and expand the world's continents. Team Aqua seeks the blue orb, the relic tied to Kyogre, believing it will awaken the sea titan and flood the world into a new ocean paradise. But the truth is, neither team fully understands what they're doing. They know the orbs are powerful. They know the orbs are connected to the legends, but they do not understand the scale of the forces they're trying to unleash. It's like finding an ancient switch labeled ocean or land and assuming you can flick it on and off without consequence. And when those orbs are finally taken from their resting places, the world reacts. Not because the orbs are alive, but because they resonate with something alive, something sleeping, something so deeply connected to Hoenn's environment that even a small disturbance can ripple across the entire region. The first major signs appear as weather anomalies that begin to concentrate around key locations. Rain becomes heavier near the coast. Sun becomes harsher inland. It's not evenly spread. It's as if the world is being pulled in two directions again, the same way it was in the ancient era when Kyogre and Groudon fought. In the ocean routes, the water feels rougher. Currents shift unpredictably. The sea becomes less welcoming, more like a restless creature. In the deserts and mountains, heat intensifies. The air becomes dry enough to sting your lungs. The ground feels warmer beneath your feet, like the earth is waking up and stretching after a long sleep. And in the middle of all this, most people still don't understand the real cause. They see storms and drought. They don't see Kyogre and Groudon stirring beneath the surface, because legendary Pokémon don't feel real until you see them, and by the time you see them, it's usually too late. In the timeline, this is where the modern hero enters the story. The player character, a young trainer who begins their journey with simple goals: collect badges, train Pokémon, becomes stronger, gets pulled into something much larger. At first, it's small encounters. Team Aqua or Team Magma blocking a path, a suspicious group stealing something, a confrontation that feels like a typical Pokémon adventure. But those encounters escalate quickly because the villain teams aren't just causing trouble for fun, they are chasing relics. They are moving toward awakening. They are moving toward the moment the world will break. The story often brings you through places like Slateport City, where the ocean is always present, always close, always moving. Slateport is a port town, full of ships and sailors, and the smell of salt in the air. It's the kind of place where you can feel how important the sea is to Hoenn's identity. It's also the kind of place where Team Aqua's ideology feels like it could take root, because when you live by the ocean, it's easy to imagine it as something sacred. And then there's places like Mount Chimney, a towering volcano that represents the opposite extreme: fire, heat, earth. A place where Team Magma's ideology feels natural, because when you stand near molten rock and feel the ground trembling beneath you, it's easy to believe the land is the true power of the world. These locations aren't random. Hoenn's geography itself feels like it was built to reflect the Weather Trio's conflict. The region is full of water routes and islands, but also full of mountains and caves and volcanic areas. It's like the land and sea have always been in conversation here, always negotiating how much space each one gets. And Team Aqua and Team Magma are about to turn that conversation into a war. The moment the orbs become central to the story, everything accelerates. Team Aqua and Team Magma begin acting more aggressively. They aren't just stealing small items anymore. They are moving toward ancient sites, toward places where the world's oldest power sleeps. The villain teams also start to reveal something unsettling about themselves. They aren't afraid, they're excited. They talk about awakening Kyogre or Groudon like it's the final step of a grand plan, not like it's opening a door that might never close again. In their minds, the world is going to be improved. In reality, the world is about to be destabilized. And one of the most eerie details of this part of the timeline is how quickly nature responds. It's like the environment itself is sensitive to the presence of the orbs. Storms gather faster, heat intensifies. It's almost as if Kyogre and Groudon are dreaming, sensing that something is calling to them from the surface, because that's what the orbs do. They call, they resonate like a signal. And somewhere deep beneath the sea, Kyogre begins to stir. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, Groudon begins to stir. At this point in the story, people in Hoenn might begin to notice something else. A shift in the behavior of Pokémon. Wild Pokémon become more agitated. Certain species appear more frequently in places they normally wouldn't. Ocean Pokémon might behave more aggressively, as if the sea itself is restless. Ground Pokémon might become more territorial, as if the land is tightening its grip. Pokémon, in the Pokémon world, often sense changes in nature before humans do. They live closer to the rhythms of the environment. They feel pressure changes. They respond to shifts in weather and energy. So when primal forces begin to rise, Pokémon respond instinctively, and that response becomes another warning sign, a warning that most people still don't understand. But in the timeline, the warnings are stacking up now. The orbs are moving. The villain teams are closing in. The weather is shifting. The world is beginning to tilt toward extremes. And above it all, Rayquaza remains silent, not because it isn't watching, but because Rayquaza's role is not to stop every small imbalance. Rayquaza intervenes only when the world reaches the point of collapse. It is the final safeguard, the last answer. And the truth is, the world isn't quite broken yet. It's just bending. It's just leaning. It's just beginning to wake up. But as the villain teams push forward, As the orbs come closer to the places where Kyogre and Groudon sleep, that bending will become breaking, that leaning will become falling. The world will stop being stable enough to ignore, and soon, Hoenn will face the same nightmare its ancestors once faced. A world caught between flood and drought, a world pulled between sea and land, a world that will need the sky's guardian once again. Because once Kyogre or Groudon fully awakens, the Weather Trio timeline stops being a legend and becomes reality. There is a certain kind of fear that doesn't arrive with a scream. It arrives with a feeling, a quiet pressure in the air, like the world has become slightly heavier overnight. The sky looks the same, the streets look the same, people still go about their day, but something underneath it all has shifted. In Hoenn, as Team Aqua and Team Magma move closer to the heart of their plans, that kind of fear begins to settle into the region like an invisible fog. Not because everyone knows what's coming, but because nature itself is starting to react in ways that are impossible to ignore. By this point in the timeline, the weather no longer feels like coincidence. Rain isn't simply rain. Heat isn't simply heat. The storms come too fast and linger too long. The sunlight feels sharper, like it's pressing down harder than it should. Hoenn is a region that has always been shaped by water roots and open skies, but now those skies seem restless, and those waters feel like they're waiting for something. Even when the world appears calm, it carries tension, the way an ocean can look smooth on the surface while hiding powerful currents beneath. Team Aqua and Team Magma become bolder as they move. Their plans stop being whispered rumors and become obvious disruptions. They appear in places they don't belong, blocking roads, stealing important items, threatening researchers, and forcing their way into ancient sites. Their presence changes the tone of the journey. You're no longer just a young trainer traveling from town to town, collecting badges and building a team. You're moving through a region where something larger is happening, something dangerous enough that even ordinary citizens begin to notice. People in towns start talking about strange weather. Scientists and sailors exchange worried conversations. The world feels like it's turning its head toward a storm it can't yet see. In the Ruby and Sapphire timeline, the villain team you face depends on which version of the story you're in, but the emotional weight is the same. In Pokémon Ruby, Team Magma drives the central conflict, obsessed with awakening Groudon and expanding the land. In Pokémon Sapphire, Team Aqua takes that role, obsessed with awakening Kyogre and expanding the sea. In Pokémon Emerald, both teams are active, and the conflict becomes even more intense because the world is being pulled in both directions at once. But no matter which path you follow, the deeper truth remains. The villains are not simply causing trouble, they are trying to rewrite the planet. As you travel through Hoenn, you begin to see how carefully the region's geography mirrors the Weather Trio's theme. The coastline and harbors represent the sea's influence, places where Team Aqua's dreams feel possible. The mountains and deserts represent the land's influence, places where Team Magma's ambition feels powerful. Hoenn is the perfect stage for this story because it is a region built on contrast. Water is everywhere, but so is rock and earth. The world feels like it was designed to be balanced, and that balance is exactly what the villain teams want to break. One of the first truly unsettling moments in this timeline comes when the villain teams begin targeting places tied to Hoenn's oldest secrets. They aren't satisfied with stealing from ordinary people anymore. They move toward research facilities and ancient ruins, toward locations that feel older than modern civilization. When they step into those spaces, it's like the story itself becomes heavier, because these are places where the world's history is carved into stone. These are the places where myths stop feeling like bedtime stories and start feeling like warnings written by people who lived through catastrophe. In many versions of the Hoenn story, a key moment involves the villain team stealing a submarine or using advanced technology to reach deeper places than humans were ever meant to go. The sea is no longer just a setting for surfing routes and fishing rods. It becomes a doorway, a deep, dark passage leading towards something ancient. The idea of a submarine in a Pokémon world already feels significant, because it means humans are pushing into the ocean's depths with a determination that borders on arrogance. It's one thing to sail across the sea, it's another to dive into its darkest places and search for sleeping gods. And when those gods begin to wake, the ocean reacts first. The water becomes more violent. Waves strike coastlines with unusual force. Storm clouds gather with a kind of urgency, like the sky is being pulled downward by something rising from below. Even the sound of the ocean feels different, as if the sea has gained a deeper voice. In coastal towns, the rain begins to fall more often, and it doesn't feel refreshing anymore. It feels relentless, as if the world is being soaked through. At the same time, the land reacts in its own way. Heat builds in places where it shouldn't. The air becomes dry and sharp. The ground feels warmer beneath your feet, especially near mountains and volcanic areas. Tremors become more frequent, small shakes that rattle rocks loose and make people pause in the middle of their routines. The land isn't simply existing, it's stirring. It's shifting as if something deep inside it is stretching after a long sleep. The villain teams interpret these signs as proof that their plan is working. They don't see the danger, they see progress. They see the world responding to their ambition and believe it means they are in control. It's a frightening kind of confidence, because it isn't born from strength, it's born from misunderstanding. They believe Kyogre or Groudon will awaken and obey them, like a legendary weapon they can point toward the future they want. They don't understand that awakening a primal force is not like releasing a Pokémon from a Pokéball. It's like opening a dam and expecting the flood to stop when you tell it to. This is the point in the timeline where the hero's journey begins to feel less like an adventure and more like a race. You aren't just traveling forward for your own growth anymore. You're chasing the villain team, trying to catch up before they reach the final step. Every city and route becomes part of a larger path leading toward disaster. Even the gym challenge, which once felt like the main story, begins to feel like something happening alongside the real crisis, like a personal journey continuing while the world itself is approaching a breaking point. And then comes the moment that changes everything. The moment the villain team reaches the place where Kyogre or Groudon sleeps, and the orb is brought close enough to act as a true key. In the Hoenn story, these locations are not ordinary caves. They are sacred chambers, places hidden away from the surface world, sealed behind ancient barriers, and surrounded by the kind of silence that feels unnatural. When you enter them, it feels like stepping into a space that doesn't belong to humans, like you're trespassing in the home of something enormous. When the orb is presented, the awakening begins. The exact details differ depending on the version, but the feeling is always the same. There is a sudden surge of energy, like the air itself has been charged. The environment shifts instantly. If it is Kyogre awakening, rain begins to pour as if the sky has been split open. The sea grows violent, waves surging with unnatural power. The world darkens under heavy storm clouds. Lightning flickers. The sound of rain becomes deafening. It's as if the ocean has reached up and grabbed the sky by the throat. If it is Groudon awakening, the opposite happens. The clouds break apart, the sunlight intensifies, and the air becomes dry in an instant. The ground seems to radiate heat. The world takes on a harsh brightness, like the sun is too close. In some tellings, the land itself shifts, rising in places where it shouldn't, creating new ground or expanding existing land masses. The heat isn't just uncomfortable, it feels like a warning, like the world is being baked into something new. And in Pokemon Emerald, the nightmare becomes complete because both awaken. Kyogre rises, Groudon rises, and the world is caught between endless rain and endless sunlight at the same time. Hoenn becomes unstable, like the region is being pulled apart by two opposing forces that refuse to compromise. The sea surges, the land expands, storms clash with drought. The sky becomes chaotic, as if it cannot decide whether to pour water or burn it away. The balance that held for centuries breaks in a matter of moments. This is the moment where the villain teams realize they've made a mistake. Not immediately, perhaps. At first, they might still cling to the belief that they can control what they awakened. They might shout commands. They might hold the orb like it's a leash. They might insist that their plan is still under control. But nature does not respond to shouting. Kyogre does not care what humans want. Groudon does not care what humans want. These beings are not listening. They are acting on instinct, on primal purpose, on a drive older than civilization. The world begins to tilt into catastrophe. Floodwaters rise in coastal areas. Rain falls so hard that it becomes difficult to see. People retreat indoors, watching the sky with fear. Ships become stranded, unable to sail through violent waters. Routes that were once calm become dangerous. At the same time, drought spreads across the land. Water evaporates. Rivers shrink. The air becomes so dry it feels like it could crack stone. Forests become vulnerable. The ground becomes harsh and brittle. And for the first time in this modern era, people truly feel it, not as a story, not as a myth, but as reality. The Weather Trio's ancient conflict is no longer a legend told by elders. It is happening again, right now, in the present tense. The world is being reshaped by forces too large to fight, too large to stop with ordinary strength. It's a crisis that makes humans feel small again, the same way ancient humans must have felt when they watched the sea climb and the land burn. And somewhere above it all, Rayquaza remains silent, not because it doesn't care, but because its role has always been the same. Rayquaza does not intervene when the world is merely threatened. Rayquaza intervenes when the world is breaking, and Hoenn is now approaching that breaking point. Because once Kyogre and Groudon awaken, the only thing that can stop them is not human ambition, not villain plans, not even the courage of a young trainer. The only thing that can stop them is the ancient balance that has always existed above them. The sky's guardian, the one who ended this conflict once before, Rayquaza. And in the next part of the timeline, the world will reach the moment where Rayquaza can no longer remain distant. The storm will rise high enough, the drought will burn wide enough, and the clash between sea and land will become loud enough that even the sky itself will have to respond. Once Kyogre or Groudon fully awakens, the region of Hoenn stops feeling like a place that can be managed. It stops feeling like a map with routes and towns and predictable paths. It becomes something older, something wilder, like the land itself is returning to a primordial state where humans are no longer in control. The shift is not subtle anymore. It is loud, it is obvious, it is the kind of change that makes even the most skeptical person finally understand that the old stories were never just stories. In the beginning of the crisis, the weather seems to spread outward like a stain. It doesn't remain isolated to one city or one coastline. It reaches farther and farther, wrapping the entire region in the influence of whatever has awakened. If Kyogre is active, the rain becomes constant, heavy, and relentless. It doesn't fall like ordinary rain that comes and goes. It falls like the sky is being emptied, Storm clouds thicken until the sunlight feels like a memory. Thunder rolls across the region, not as a distant sound but as a constant presence, like the world itself is growling. The ocean becomes rougher, and the waves feel less like waves and more like the sea trying to climb upward, reclaiming space it believes belongs to it. If Growldawn is active, the opposite happens. The sky clears, but it is not comforting, it is harsh. The sunlight becomes intense, almost blinding, and the air dries out as if all moisture has been pulled away. Heat settles over the land and refuses to lift. Even places that should feel cool begin to feel warm. The ground radiates heat back up into the air, and the region takes on a strange, brittle feeling, like the world is being baked from the inside out. Water begins to feel precious. Rivers seem smaller. The land itself looks as though it is tightening, hardening, expanding, asserting dominance over the sea. And in the Emerald Timeline, where both Kyogre and Growldawn awaken, Hoenn becomes trapped in a nightmare of extremes. Rain falls in sheets, but the sun burns through it with unnatural intensity. Storm clouds gather, but they are torn apart by waves of heat. The sky cannot decide whether it is drowning or scorching. The sea surges, the land shifts, and the world feels unstable, like it is being pulled apart at the seams. It's not just bad weather anymore, it's a war between elements, and the battlefield is the entire region. For the people of Hoenn, this is the moment when daily life collapses. In coastal towns, flooding becomes a real threat. Waves crash harder against docks and shorelines, and low-lying areas become dangerous. Ships are stranded or forced to remain in harbor because the sea is too violent to travel. Fishermen who once depended on calm waters now watch the horizon with fear because the ocean feels angry, unpredictable, and alive. The constant rain seeps into everything, soaking the ground until it feels like the land itself might dissolve into mud. In inland areas, the heat becomes suffocating. It isn't just uncomfortable, it's oppressive. People struggle to work outside. Pokémon that normally thrive in forests or grasslands begin behaving differently, seeking shade or water, becoming restless and agitated. The land's dryness creates a sense of fragility, like one spark could turn a peaceful root into a dangerous blaze. Even the air feels thinner, as if breathing has become slightly harder. The world feels strained, like it is being pushed beyond what it was meant to endure. In the middle of this chaos, Team Aqua and Team Magma are forced to confront a truth they didn't want to accept. They wanted power, but they didn't understand what power actually meant. They believed they were awakening Kyogre or Growldawn to reshape the world according to their ideals. They imagined themselves as visionaries, but now they see that the legendary Pokémon they awakened do not recognize them as masters. The orbs are not chains, they are keys, and once the door is opened, it cannot be closed by the same hands that unlocked it. There is something deeply unsettling about the villain team's realization because it reveals how fragile human confidence is. For so long, they spoke with certainty. They planned, they commanded, they moved through Hoenn like they owned the future. But now, standing in the presence of a primal force, their certainty becomes fear. Their voices become smaller. Their ambition turns into panic. And even if they refuse to admit it out loud, they understand that they have made a mistake that might not be fixable. The hero, the young trainer traveling through Hoenn, becomes the only person positioned to do anything, not because they are the strongest being in the region, but because they are moving, acting, refusing to freeze in fear. In a crisis this large, most people can only react. They can only hide. They can only wait for someone else to solve it. But the trainer continues forward, following the trail of the disaster, chasing the source of the imbalance because the story demands motion. It demands courage. And it demands that someone, even someone small, stand between the world and collapse. As the crisis deepens, the legends of the Weather Trio stop feeling like ancient history and start feeling like prophecy. People begin speaking the names Kyogre and Growlithe with a different tone now, not as distant myths, but as real beings whose presence can be felt in every drop of rain and every wave of heat. The old carvings and ruins suddenly make sense. The warnings hidden in ancient places feel less like superstition and more like messages left behind by people who knew this could happen again. And this is the moment when Rayquaza's silence becomes impossible to ignore. Because in every version of the Weather Trio myth, there is one constant. Kyogre and Growlithe cannot coexist in full power. Their conflict is not personal, but it is absolute. Sea wants space. Land wants space. Neither will yield. If they remain awake and active, the world will not stabilize. It will only become more extreme. Flood and drought will spread until Hoenn is no longer recognizable, until the region becomes either endless ocean or endless desert, or worse, a fractured land caught between both, unable to support life. This is why Rayquaza exists in the story. Rayquaza is not simply a third legendary Pokémon to be collected. It is the balance, the enforcement, the sky's answer to chaos, and Rayquaza does not descend for minor disturbances. It does not intervene when storms are inconvenient or when summers are too hot. Rayquaza intervenes when the world is breaking, when the war between sea and land becomes so intense that it threatens everything. And now, Hoenn has reached that point. In the Emerald timeline especially, the moment feels inevitable. The region is being torn between two primal forces at once. Team Aqua and Team Magma, once confident, are now desperate. The hero is pushed into the role of mediator, not because they asked for it, but because there is no one else left to do it, and the world itself seems to be calling upward, like the chaos has risen high enough to touch the sky. This is where the Sky Pillar becomes more than a landmark. It becomes the last hope. The Sky Pillar stands tall and ancient, rising from the earth like a spine reaching toward the heavens. It feels older than the region's cities, older than its roads, older than its modern life. It is a place built with purpose, as if ancient people knew that someday someone would need to climb it, that someday the sky's guardian would need to be called down. The tower is not comfortable. It is not friendly. It is a structure meant to endure time, meant to remain standing long after everything else changes. As the hero approaches the Sky Pillar, the journey feels different from any other part of the adventure. This isn't like walking into a gym where the rules are clear and the challenge is contained. This isn't like exploring a cave for treasure. This is like approaching a sacred place where the world's fate might be decided. The air around the Sky Pillar feels charged, not with electricity like a thunderstorm, but with tension, as if the atmosphere itself is waiting. In the old traditions of Hoenn, the Draconid people are the ones who understand this place best. They are the keepers of the legend, the ones who know Rayquaza is real, and the ones who know that balance can be restored only through the sky. Their knowledge becomes crucial now, because without it, the Sky Pillar would just be another ruin. With it, it becomes the bridge between human desperation and divine intervention. The climb up the Sky Pillar is symbolic. Every step upward feels like moving away from the chaos below and toward the quiet authority of the sky. The world beneath is drowning and burning at the same time, but the higher you climb, the calmer it becomes. The noise of storms fades. The heat becomes less intense. The air becomes thinner, cleaner, quieter. It feels like leaving the battlefield behind and entering the realm of something ancient and watchful, and at the top, Rayquaza waits, not like a creature that has been hiding, like a guardian that has been watching the whole time. Rayquaza's presence is overwhelming in a way that is different from Kyogre and Groudon. Kyogre and Groudon feel like raw power, like natural disasters given form. Rayquaza feels like control, like restraint, like a force that does not need to rage because it already holds authority. When Rayquaza appears, it is as if the sky itself has become aware, as if the atmosphere has decided to act. In the mythic structure of the story, this is the turning point. The moment the sky answers the chaos of sea and land, the moment balance becomes possible again. But Rayquaza does not simply solve everything instantly. The world is already in crisis. Kyogre and Groudon are already awake. The storms and drought are already spreading. Rayquaza's appearance is not the end of the conflict, but the beginning of its resolution. It is the moment when the story shifts from disaster unfolding to disaster being confronted, because now, the weather trio is complete. When Rayquaza finally appears, the world feels like it pauses for half a heartbeat, not because the storms instantly stop, and not because the heat suddenly fades away, but because something changes in the air, something deeper than weather, something older than fear. It's the feeling of a final authority arriving, the way a room can fall silent when someone powerful steps inside. Hoenn has been caught in the pull of sea and land, stretched thin between rain and drought, and now the sky itself has decided it can no longer remain distant. Rayquaza does not rise from the earth or the ocean. It descends from above, from the thin, high atmosphere where humans cannot survive for long. In the myths, Rayquaza is not just a creature that flies. It is the sky's will given form, a dragon that lives where the world touches space. Its body is long and serpentine, marked with glowing patterns that look almost like ancient writing, as if the sky carved symbols into it to remind everything below who holds the final say. When it moves, it doesn't flap wings the way ordinary Pokémon do. It glides, it coils, it slices through air as if air is not a barrier, but an extension of itself. This is why Rayquaza feels different from Kyogre and Groudon. Kyogre and Groudon are disasters. They are floods and droughts. They are the overwhelming force of nature unleashed. Rayquaza is not a disaster. Rayquaza is a correction. It doesn't bring chaos. It brings order. And that order is so strong that even chaos has to stop and look. In the Emerald timeline, where both Kyogre and Groudon are active, Rayquaza's arrival is the moment everything becomes fully mythic. Up until now, the crisis has been terrible, but still understandable as extreme weather, as the consequence of a villain team's mistake. But when Rayquaza enters the story, it becomes clear that this is not just a regional emergency. This is an ancient pattern repeating itself. The same conflict that once shaped the world is happening again, and the same force that ended it before has returned to end it again. In the sky above Hoenn, storms churn and twist. Dark clouds roll across the region like an endless ceiling, but sunlight still burns through in harsh, unnatural beams where Groudon's influence breaks the rain apart. The atmosphere looks broken, like the world is being argued over by two gods at once. Thunder echoes, heat shimmers, rain falls, but evaporates in places where the sun's intensity becomes too strong. It's a world caught between two extremes, unable to settle into anything stable, and Rayquaza enters that chaos like a blade cutting through tangled thread. In the old legends, Kyogre and Groudon do not stop because they suddenly decide to. They stop because Rayquaza's presence forces them to. There is a hierarchy in nature that humans rarely think about, but in the Weather Trio myth, it becomes visible. Sea and land may be enormous, But the sky sits above them both. The sky watches everything. The sky contains everything, and Rayquaza, as the embodiment of that sky, carries an authority that Kyogre and Groudon cannot ignore. When Rayquaza confronts them, the moment feels less like a battle between Pokémon and more like the world itself correcting a mistake. Kyogre's storms clash against Rayquaza's calm dominance. Groudon's heat pushes upward, trying to expand and burn away the clouds. But Rayquaza does not respond with frantic aggression. It responds with certainty. Its movements are deliberate, almost slow, as if it knows that speed is unnecessary when the outcome is already decided by balance. The confrontation is not described in detail the way a typical Pokémon battle would be. It's not about move lists and damage numbers. It's about pressure, energy, and dominance. It's about the feeling of the sky pushing down on the sea and land, forcing them back into alignment. Rayquaza's presence is like a weight placed on the conflict, pinning it down until it can no longer thrash freely. For Kyogre, the sea's representative, this pressure feels like the ocean being told to stay within its boundaries. It feels like storms being commanded to calm. It feels like rain being reminded that it is meant to nourish, not drown. For Groudon, the land's representative, it feels like the earth being reminded that it cannot expand endlessly without consequence. It feels like sunlight being softened back into warmth instead of punishment. It feels like heat being forced to retreat into the ground where it belongs. In Emerald, this is the moment when the world begins to stabilize. The storms don't vanish instantly, but they begin to weaken. The rain becomes less violent, less constant. The thunder rolls farther away. The sunlight becomes less harsh, less relentless. The air stops feeling like it's tearing itself apart. It's as if Rayquaza has placed its hand on the region's shoulder and said, quietly but firmly, enough. And as that balance begins to return, something else becomes clear. Humans cannot solve this conflict alone. The villain teams cannot solve it. They caused it. The hero trainer cannot overpower Kyogre and Groudon through strength alone, not in the mythic sense. Even the greatest champions of Hoenn are small compared to these forces. The solution has always been the same: balance enforced by the sky. That is Rayquaza's role, and it fulfills it without hesitation. But Rayquaza's intervention is not just a moment of peace. It is also a reminder of how close Hoenn came to destruction. Because when the weather begins to settle, people can finally look around and see the damage clearly. Flooded routes, storm-battered coasts, areas dried out and cracked from heat, Pokémon displaced from their habitats, towns shaken by tremors, ships stranded, forests strained. The region is still standing, but it feels exhausted, like it survived something it was never meant to endure. This is where the story becomes quieter again, but not in the comforting way it was before the crisis. It becomes quiet in the way a place becomes quiet after a storm passes through. The air feels strange. The sky looks cleaner, but also emptier. People move carefully, as if they don't trust the world to remain stable yet. And in that uneasy calm, the villain teams face their own collapse. Team Aqua and Team Magma, once so confident, are forced into humiliation. Their leaders, who spoke about reshaping the world with certainty, now stand in the aftermath of their own mistake. They can't pretend anymore. They can't argue that their plan worked. The world did not become a paradise. It became a disaster. Their dream of a better future nearly destroyed the region they claimed to care about. In many tellings, this is the moment when the villain teams begin to scatter. Some members flee, some surrender, some simply vanish into the background, their belief shattered. The organizations that once felt unstoppable suddenly look fragile because ideology is easy to hold when nothing challenges it. But when reality arrives like a flood or a drought, ideology breaks. And yet, even as the crisis resolves, there is a lingering tension in the Weather Trio timeline, because Kyogre and Groudon do not cease to exist. They do not disappear forever. They are not destroyed. They are simply forced back into dormancy, back into the deep places where they belong. The world stabilizes, not because the sea and land stop wanting space, but because they are returned to sleep, sealed away again until the next time someone disturbs them. This is part of what makes the Weather Trio story so haunting. It does not end with permanent victory. It ends with temporary balance, restored through intervention. The threat is contained, not erased. The region survives, but the possibility of collapse remains, always present in the background of the world's history. And Rayquaza, after fulfilling its role, does what it has always done. It withdraws. It does not remain in Hoenn's cities to be celebrated. It does not demand worship. It returns to the sky, to the high atmosphere where it belongs, watching the world from above, like a silent guardian that only moves when necessary. In the mythic sense, Rayquaza's departure is almost as important as its arrival, because it reinforces the idea that balance is not something humans can own. It is something that exists beyond them, something they can benefit from but not control. In the modern timeline, the hero trainer continues their journey after the crisis, because Pokémon stories always return to the personal path. Gym badges still matter. The Pokémon League still waits. The rival still exists somewhere out there, training and growing stronger. Life continues. But the hero is not the same after witnessing the Weather Trio's conflict. No one is. Seeing Kyogre and Groudon awaken changes how you understand the world. It reminds you that beneath every calm ocean route and every peaceful mountain trail, there are forces older than civilization, sleeping and waiting. And this is where the Weather Trio timeline begins to split into layers. There is the surface layer, where trainers battle and travel and grow. And there is the deep layer, where the world's balance is maintained by ancient forces that most people never see. The crisis revealed that deep layer for a moment, like pulling back a curtain and glimpsing the machinery of nature. Then the curtain falls again, and life returns to normal, but the memory remains. In Emerald, Rayquaza's intervention becomes the defining event of the story, the moment the region was saved not by human ambition, but by the restoration of ancient balance. In Ruby and Sapphire, the crisis is more focused on one legendary Pokémon awakening, but the theme is the same. Humans cannot reshape the world without consequences. Kyogre and Groudon are not tools. They are the sea and land themselves. And Rayquaza is the final safeguard, the sky's answer to imbalance. As the weather calms and Hoenn begins to recover, the region settles into a quieter rhythm once again. The rain becomes ordinary, the sun becomes gentle, the tides return to their natural patterns, the ground stops trembling. Life begins to repair itself. But deep below the ocean, Kyogre still sleeps, and deep beneath the earth, Groudon still rests. Their power remains contained, not gone, and high above, Rayquaza drifts unseen, watching, waiting, ready to descend again if the world ever tilts too far. Because in Hoenn, balance is not guaranteed. It is guarded, it is enforced, and it is always, always fragile. After Rayquaza forces the conflict back into balance, Hoenn does not immediately feel normal again. The storms begin to fade, and the heat begins to loosen its grip, but the region carries the weight of what just happened, like the air itself remembers. Even when the sky clears, and the rain softens into something gentle, there is still a sense of unease that lingers in the quiet spaces between towns. It's the kind of silence that comes after a powerful storm, when people step outside and look around slowly, trying to understand what survived and what changed. In the days that follow the crisis, Hoenn feels like a place waking up from a nightmare. The ocean routes are calmer, but sailors remain cautious, scanning the horizon as if expecting the clouds to return at any moment. Coastal towns begin repairing docks and pathways damaged by violent tides. People check their homes, their boats, their storage rooms, counting what was lost and what can be replaced. Inland, the ground begins to cool again, and the air regains moisture. But the memory of that intense heat remains, making every warm breeze feel suspicious. It takes time for the region to trust the weather again, because once you've seen the sky become a weapon, you never look at clouds the same way. Pokémon across Hoenn also seem to carry the after effects. Wild Pokémon that were agitated during the crisis begin returning to their usual patterns, but the transition isn't instant. Some habitats were disrupted. Some Pokémon migrated temporarily to escape flooding or drought. Ocean Pokémon may have moved into areas they normally wouldn't, pushed by strange currents. Land Pokémon may have retreated into caves or shaded forests to avoid the heat. In the aftermath, the natural order slowly reasserts itself, like a great wheel turning back into place, but it does so gradually, as if nature itself is carefully testing the balance before fully relaxing again. For ordinary people, this is the moment when the legends of Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza become real in a way that can never be undone. Before the crisis, the weather trio might have been spoken about like folklore, like ancient stories carved into stone and passed down through tradition. After the crisis, no one can pretend it was just myth. The sea and land gods were awakened, the sky guardian descended, and the region nearly broke under the strain. The weather trio becomes something more than a story. It becomes a piece of history that living people witnessed with their own eyes. This shift changes how Hoenn sees itself. The region has always been proud of its natural beauty, its wide oceans, and its forests and mountains. But now there is a new understanding beneath that pride. Nature is not only beautiful, nature is powerful, ancient, and capable of overwhelming everything humans build. Hoenn's relationship with its environment becomes more respectful, even if most people don't consciously realize it. When you know the ocean can rise and swallow land, you don't take calm water for granted. When you know the sun can burn with unnatural intensity, you don't treat a clear day as something guaranteed. The villain teams, Team Aqua and Team Magma, do not disappear completely after the crisis, but they lose their momentum. Their grand visions collapse under the weight of reality. Their members scatter, some abandoning the cause entirely, others quietly returning to ordinary lives, embarrassed or shaken by what they helped unleash. Their leaders, once so confident, become figures of failure in the eyes of the public. The dream of reshaping the world is revealed for what it truly was, not progress, but arrogance. And while some members might still cling to the ideology in private, the organizations as they existed during the crisis are broken. For the hero trainer, the journey continues, but it does so with a new depth. The gym challenge, which once felt like the main purpose of traveling across Hoenn, now feels like one thread in a much larger tapestry. The hero has seen the region's deepest forces awaken. They have stood at the edge of catastrophe and watched the world survive only because balance was enforced. That kind of experience changes a person, even if the story returns to the familiar rhythm of battles and badges. Every route traveled afterward carries a faint echo of what happened, like the land remembers your footsteps from the days when the sky was at war. As the hero moves forward, Hoenn begins to settle back into its familiar shape. The ocean routes become navigable again. The rain returns to normal patterns. The heat becomes seasonal instead of oppressive. People resume travel. Trainers return to the roads. The Pokemon League remains the ultimate goal for those who seek mastery. Life in the Pokemon world is resilient. It bends under pressure, but it returns, and that return is part of what makes the region feel alive. Hoenn doesn't remain frozen in fear. It heals, but healing does not mean forgetting. In the cities and towns, conversations shift. People speak about the crisis with a kind of reverence, as if they're afraid to describe it too casually. Some call it a disaster. Some call it a miracle that the region survived. Some speak of Rayquaza like a savior, even if they don't fully understand its role. Children grow up hearing first-hand accounts from parents and older siblings who saw the storms and the drought, who felt the ground tremble, who watched the sky darken. The Weather Trio becomes part of modern Hoenn's identity, not as distant myth, but as lived memory. This is where the ancient ruins and relics take on a new meaning. Places like the Sky Pillar no longer feel like mysterious structures from a forgotten era. They feel like essential pieces of Hoenn's safety, like a lock and key system built into the region's history. The Draconid traditions become more significant as well, because they are revealed to be correct. The Draconids weren't preserving fairy tales, they were preserving instructions, knowledge of how to call the Sky Guardian when the world breaks. Their role becomes quietly respected, even if most people never meet them directly. In the deeper lore of Hoenn, this aftermath also highlights the idea that legendary Pokémon are not simply rare creatures to be captured. They are part of the world's foundation. Kyogre and Groudon aren't just powerful because they have strong moves or high stats. They are powerful because their existence is tied to the sea and land themselves. Rayquaza isn't just strong because it can battle. It is strong because it represents the sky's authority. The Weather Trio are less like animals and more like living pillars that hold the world in shape. That realization changes the way the hero trainer is seen as well. To most people, a trainer is someone who travels, battles, and grows stronger. But the hero is now also someone who played a role in preventing catastrophe. They might not be celebrated publicly in every town because the Pokemon world often treats its heroes quietly, but their impact is real. The region survives partly because they acted when others froze. The hero becomes a kind of bridge between ordinary life and mythic history, a reminder that even in a world ruled by legendary forces, individual courage still matters. As the hero continues toward the Pokemon League, there is a subtle shift in how the story feels. The gym battles remain challenging, but they no longer feel like the biggest obstacle. After standing in the presence of Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza, battling a gym leader feels almost peaceful by comparison. It becomes a return to something structured, something contained, something fair. The gym challenge becomes a way of restoring normalcy, a way of reminding the region that competition and growth can exist without catastrophe. In this period, Hoenn's natural beauty begins to shine again. Routes that were soaked by endless rain begin to dry. Forests regain their calm, beaches return to their usual shape. The ocean becomes inviting again instead of threatening. The region's balance becomes visible in the landscape itself. Hoenn is once again a place where land and sea coexist, where the coastline is stable, where islands remain islands, where the world feels like it has found its equilibrium. Yet beneath that calm, the knowledge remains that this balance is not automatic. It is maintained, it is guarded. Kyogre and Groudon are asleep again, but they are not gone. Their slumber is deep, but it is not permanent. If someone were reckless enough to disturb them again, the cycle could repeat. The Weather Trio timeline teaches Hoenn that peace is not guaranteed. It is something that must be respected, something that can be broken by arrogance and restored only through balance. Rayquaza's role in the aftermath is perhaps the most mysterious. After descending and forcing the conflict to stop, Rayquaza withdraws once more into the sky. It does not remain in the region as a symbol to be worshipped. It does not sit atop a mountain waiting for admiration. It returns to the high atmosphere where it belongs, unseen and distant. This distance makes Rayquaza feel almost like a myth again, even after it has been witnessed. It becomes the kind of presence people believe in without expecting to ever see again, like a guardian angel that only appears when the world is truly desperate. In the long-term timeline of Hoenn, this crisis becomes a dividing line. There is the world before the awakening, when the Weather Trio felt like ancient legends. And there is the world after, when everyone knows those legends are real. It becomes part of the region's history, in the same way a great earthquake or a massive storm would become part of a real world's cultural memory. People remember where they were when the rain would not stop. People remember the days when the sun felt too close. People remember the fear of not knowing whether the sea or land would win. And as the hero continues their journey, the story begins to widen again. Because the Weather Trio timeline is not limited to Hoenn alone, the consequences of awakening primal forces ripple outward, not necessarily in obvious physical ways, but in the way the world understands itself. Researchers become more interested in legendary Pokémon. Organizations in other regions begin to pay attention. The idea that the planet's balance is tied to living beings becomes more accepted, more studied, more feared. This is where the Weather Trio begins to feel less like a single storyline and more like part of the Pokémon world's larger mythology. The trio's conflict is not just a Hoenn problem. It's a symbol of something universal, the tension between nature's forces, the fragility of balance, and the danger of believing the world can be controlled. Hoenn, in the aftermath, becomes a region that carries that lesson quietly. It continues to thrive, continues to grow, continues to welcome trainers and travelers. But it does so with an invisible scar, a memory of what it felt like when the sea and land tried to tear it apart. And in that memory, there is also gratitude, because the world survived. Balance returned, the sky answered, the region healed, and as Hoenn settles back into peace, the timeline moves forward toward the next great chapter of the Weather Trio's story, because the trio's legend does not end with one awakening and one resolution. Over time, new discoveries will be made, new powers will be revealed, ancient energy will be understood in deeper ways, and eventually, the story will expand beyond Hoenn's original crisis into something even larger, something that reaches higher into the sky and deeper into the nature of legendary Pokémon themselves. Because the Weather Trio are not just part of Hoenn's past, they are part of the world's foundation, and their story, like the tide and the shifting earth, is never truly finished. Years after the original Hoenn crisis became part of the region's living memory, the story of the Weather Trio returned in a new form, retold with sharper detail and deeper meaning. In the world of Pokémon, time doesn't always move in a straight line, and history is often revisited through remakes that don't simply repeat old events, but expand them. This is exactly what happens in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, where the Weather Trio timeline is not just remembered, but enhanced, as if the region itself is revealing secrets it had been holding back. In the original Ruby and Sapphire story, Kyogre and Groudon were already terrifying, already powerful enough to threaten Hoenn's stability. But in the remakes, the scale becomes even more mythic, because the games introduce a concept that feels like the missing piece of the legend: primal reversion. This isn't just an evolution or a temporary power boost. It's described as a return to an ancient state, a form Kyogre and Groudon once held long ago, when the world was younger and their power was closer to its purest expression. Primal reversion changes the way you understand the weather trio. It suggests that the Kyogre and Groudon seen in modern times are not even at their full natural strength. They are already gods of sea and land, but primal reversion reveals that their true forms are something even older, something closer to the raw foundations of the planet. In Primal Kyogre, the sea's power becomes more absolute, rain falling as if the sky itself has been claimed. In Primal Groudon, the land's power becomes more dominant, sunlight blazing with a force that feels impossible to resist. This idea adds a deeper layer to the Hoenn myth. It implies that the ancient conflict wasn't simply a battle between two legendary Pokémon, but a clash between their primal forms, forces so extreme that the world could not survive them remaining active for long. It makes Rayquaza's role feel even more important, because if Kyogre and Groudon can return to primal states, then the Sky Guardian must be capable of responding to something even greater than before. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the villain teams are reimagined with this expanded myth in mind. Team Aqua and Team Magma are still driven by ideology, still convinced they can reshape the world, but their ambitions now feel even more dangerous because they are tied directly to primal energy. Their leaders do not merely want to awaken Kyogre or Groudon, they want to awaken the ancient forms. They want the full force of sea or land unleashed, believing that this will finally create the world they dream of. The concept of primal energy becomes central here. It is described as a deep, ancient power connected to the planet itself, something that existed long before modern technology and human civilization. Primal energy is not electricity or fuel in the ordinary sense. It feels more like a fundamental force, like the life pulse of the world, and the villain teams seek to harness it, not understanding that primal energy is not something you can safely control. It is not meant to be shaped by human intention. It is meant to exist as part of the world's natural balance. In the remakes, the red orb and blue orb become even more significant because they are not just keys that awaken Kyogre and Groudon. They are catalysts for primal reversion. When the orbs resonate with the legendary Pokémon, it isn't simply an awakening. It is a transformation, a return to something ancient and overwhelming. This makes the moment of awakening feel more catastrophic because it suggests the villain teams are not merely waking sleeping giants, but turning them into something even closer to natural disasters made flesh. When Primal Kyogre awakens, the rain becomes more than relentless. It becomes total. The sky darkens in a way that feels permanent, as if the sun has been pushed away. Thunder cracks constantly. The ocean surges higher, and the water feels like it is claiming everything. It's no longer simply flooding. It is rewriting the boundaries of land and sea. The atmosphere becomes heavy with moisture, and the world feels like it is sinking into a storm that will never end. When Primal Groudon awakens, the heat becomes more than oppressive. It becomes absolute. The sun burns with a harsh intensity, and the air dries so completely that the world feels brittle. The land itself seems to expand, and in some tellings, magma and fire become part of the landscape, as if the Earth's core has been pulled closer to the surface. It's no longer just drought. It is the land asserting dominance, forcing the world into a state where water becomes scarce and life struggles to survive. And in this expanded myth, Rayquaza's role grows larger as well, because if Kyogre and Groudon can return to primal forms, then Rayquaza must also have an answer to that level of power. In the remakes, that answer comes in the form of Mega Evolution, specifically Mega Rayquaza. This isn't presented as a simple battle mechanic. It's presented as the Sky Guardian unlocking its own ancient potential, a transformation that allows it to stand against primal forces and restore balance once again. Mega Rayquaza feels like the sky's ultimate response. Its design becomes more intense, more radiant, as if the atmosphere itself is empowering it. In the lore, Rayquaza's Mega Evolution is tied to the move Dragon Ascent, a technique that feels less like an ordinary attack and more like a ritual, a motion that connects Rayquaza to the sky's highest energy. The idea is clear. When sea and land become too extreme, the sky must become stronger as well. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the Weather Trio conflict is not only retold, but made more personal and dramatic through the way the world reacts. The region feels more alive, more visibly impacted by the awakening. The storms are more cinematic, the sunlight is more blinding. The crisis feels larger, like Hoenn is not just facing bad weather, but facing the return of an ancient era. This retelling also deepens the tragedy of Team Aqua and Team Magma's ambitions. In the remakes, their plans feel even more misguided because the primal forms are clearly beyond anything a human could control. The villain leaders, whether Archie or Maxie, are not portrayed as foolish in the way some villains are. They are portrayed as dangerously idealistic. They genuinely believe they are improving the world. But when primal power erupts, their certainty collapses into horror. They see the scale of what they have unleashed, and it becomes clear that their dream is turning into a nightmare. The remakes also highlight the idea that Hoenn is a region built on ancient tension. The land and sea have always been in negotiation here, and the Weather Trio are the living embodiment of that negotiation. Primal Reversion suggests that the world's foundation is not stable by default. It is held together by balance, by forces that keep each other in check. If one force becomes too dominant, the world tips into catastrophe. Hoenn's beauty, its lush routes and shining oceans, exists because the Weather Trio are asleep, because their power is contained. In this sense, Primal Reversion doesn't just add spectacle, it adds meaning. It explains why the ancient people of Hoenn built structures like the Sky Pillar. It explains why the Draconids preserved their traditions. It explains why the Weather Trio myth has always been treated with reverence. The ancient people weren't simply afraid of Kyogre and Groudon. They were afraid of what the world would become if those forces were allowed to fully return. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire also expand the Weather Trio timeline by connecting it to something beyond Hoenn's surface. They introduce the idea that the planet is not isolated, that threats can come from the sky as well as the sea and land. This becomes important in the Delta episode, a post-game story arc that shifts the focus upward toward space and toward a danger that even Kyogre and Groudon are not directly responsible for. The Delta episode introduces a looming meteor threat, an object on a collision course with the planet. In this story, the world faces destruction from above, not from imbalance between sea and land. And yet, Rayquaza becomes central once again, because Rayquaza is not just the balance between Kyogre and Groudon. Rayquaza is the guardian of the sky itself. If something threatens the planet from space, Rayquaza is the one that responds. This is where the Weather Trio myth becomes even more cosmic. Rayquaza is no longer only the mediator of Hoenn's ancient conflict. It becomes the protector of the entire world against threats from beyond. The Sky Guardian's role expands from balancing nature to defending the planet, and in doing so, Rayquaza becomes even more mythic, a being that exists not just to stop storms and droughts, but to prevent extinction itself. In the Delta episode, the Draconid people return as key figures, and their ancient knowledge becomes vital again. They speak of Rayquaza not as a rare Pokémon to be caught, but as a savior that can be summoned when the world is in danger. Their traditions, preserved for generations, are revealed to be accurate, not symbolic. They have been waiting for the moment when Rayquaza would need to be called again, not only to stop Kyogre and Groudon, but to stop something far worse. The remakes, in this way, deepen the Weather Trio timeline by showing that Hoenn's ancient balance is part of a larger pattern. The world is constantly threatened by extremes, whether from nature's forces or from cosmic events, and the legendary Pokémon are not simply rare creatures living in hidden caves. They are part of the world's defense system, ancient beings tied to the planet's survival. Primal Reversion, Mega Rayquaza, and the Delta episode all add to the feeling that Hoenn's myth is not finished. It is evolving. The story of Kyogre and Groudon's conflict becomes richer, more layered, because now you understand that their awakening is not just about weather. It is about primal energy, ancient power, and the delicate balance that keeps the world livable. And as the timeline moves forward from this expanded retelling, the Weather Trio become even more important symbols. Kyogre represents the sea's endless desire to expand, to cover, to nurture, and overwhelm. Groudon represents the land's desire to rise, to claim, to provide stability and scorch. Rayquaza represents the sky's authority, the balance that prevents either force from becoming absolute. In Hoenn's modern era, trainers may still chase badges and victories, but beneath that familiar journey, the deeper truth remains. The region exists in peace because ancient forces are sleeping, because balance is maintained, because the Sky Guardian watches, and the moment humans forget that truth, the moment they believe the world can be reshaped without consequence, the Weather Trio story reminds them what happens. The sea rises, the land burns, and the sky must answer. Even after Hoenn survives the chaos of Kyogre and Groudon's awakening, even after the rain softens and the sunlight becomes gentle again, the region never truly returns to the innocence it had before. The Weather Trio crisis leaves a mark on the world, not always visible in broken buildings or flooded roads, but in the way people think. Once you've watched nature itself nearly rewrite your home, it becomes harder to believe that the world is stable. It becomes harder to assume tomorrow will look like today. And in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, that lingering unease becomes the doorway into the Delta episode, a chapter of the Weather Trio timeline that feels quieter at first, but ultimately expands the legend into something much larger. The Delta episode begins with a strange feeling in the air, the kind of subtle tension that returns even after the world seems calm. Hoenn has just endured a crisis tied to ancient forces, and now the region is trying to breathe again, trying to settle into peace. Trainers return to their journeys, cities resume their routines, the sea becomes navigable again, the land becomes stable again. The world seems safe, but above it all, far beyond the clouds, another threat is moving silently through space, a threat that does not care about oceans or continents, storms or drought. A meteor, immense and unstoppable, is drifting toward the planet like a slow and inevitable sentence. What makes this threat feel different is its silence. Kyogre and Groudon's awakening was loud, dramatic, and immediate. The sky darkened, the rain fell, the heat rose. People felt it in their bones. The meteor threat is quieter. Most people don't notice it at first. You can't hear it approaching. You can't see it from the ground. It doesn't announce itself with storms or tremors. It is simply there, in the cold emptiness of space, moving closer with every passing moment, indifferent to the lives beneath it. And yet, even if most people can't see it, the world begins to react in subtle ways. Researchers notice unusual readings. Scientists speak in worried tones. There is a sense that something is wrong, something beyond the normal reach of weather and land. It's as if the planet itself is aware of the approaching danger, the way animals can sense an earthquake before it happens. The atmosphere feels tense again, but not because of rain or heat. It feels tense because the sky is holding a secret. In the Delta episode, the Weather Trio timeline shifts focus away from the sea and land conflict and upward toward Rayquaza's greater purpose. Because Rayquaza was never just the mediator between Kyogre and Groudon, Rayquaza is the guardian of the sky itself. It exists in the ozone layer, high above the world, in a place where the boundary between planet and space becomes thin. In earlier myths, Rayquaza descended to stop Kyogre and Groudon's battle, but in this story, Rayquaza's duty becomes even more immense. It must protect the entire planet from a threat that comes from beyond the world's natural balance. This is where the Delta episode becomes deeply mythic. It's no longer just about restoring balance between land and sea. It's about survival on a cosmic scale. The meteor is not a rival force like Kyogre or Groudon. It is not a living being with instincts that can be suppressed. It is a massive object moving with unstoppable momentum. If it strikes, it could end everything, not just in Hoenn, but across the world. It is the kind of threat that makes even legendary Pokémon feel small in comparison. And yet, Rayquaza is the one chosen to face it. The Draconid people return as key figures in this part of the timeline, and their presence adds a sense of ancient continuity to the story. The Draconids have always been tied to Rayquaza's legend. They have always preserved traditions about calling the Sky Guardian when disaster threatens. But in the Delta episode, their knowledge becomes more urgent because they are not simply recalling old myths. They are responding to a crisis that requires their traditions to be more than stories. Their belief in Rayquaza becomes a lifeline. Among the Draconids, one figure stands out as the voice of this ancient knowledge, Zinnia. She is not a typical character. She doesn't speak like a gym leader or a villain. She speaks like someone who carries history in her blood, someone who has been raised with the understanding that the world can end if balance is not maintained. Zinnia's presence feels mysterious, almost unsettling at first, because she moves through the story with confidence, as if she knows things others don't. And she does. She understands the meteor threat long before most people fully accept it. Zinnia's role in the Delta episode is complicated. She is not purely an ally, but she is not an enemy either. She is driven by a belief that the world must be saved, and she is willing to do what she thinks is necessary, even if it means acting alone. She treats Rayquaza as something sacred, something that cannot be controlled casually. Her actions are shaped by the weight of Draconid tradition, by the understanding that summoning Rayquaza is not like calling a powerful Pokémon for battle. It is like calling a god to fulfill its duty. The story begins to revolve around the idea of the keystone and the power needed to awaken Rayquaza's full potential. In the remakes, Mega Evolution is not just a gameplay mechanic. It is woven into the lore as a kind of bond between trainer and Pokémon, an energy exchange that can unlock deeper power. And for Rayquaza, that deeper power is essential, because the meteor threat is not something ordinary strength can stop. Rayquaza must mega evolve, not as a show of dominance, but as a necessity. Mega Rayquaza becomes the sky's ultimate weapon, a form that feels like it was designed specifically for this kind of cosmic threat. Its body becomes even more radiant, more intense, as if the sky is pouring its energy into it. It feels like Rayquaza is no longer simply a guardian of Hoenn, but a guardian of the entire planet. When you imagine Mega Rayquaza rising into the upper atmosphere, you can picture the clouds parting beneath it, the sky opening like a path, and the world holding its breath as its protector ascends. But before Rayquaza can be summoned and empowered, the story explores another key idea: human disagreement, even in the face of disaster. In the Delta episode, there are multiple plans to stop the meteor. Some involve technology, massive energy weapons, attempts to destroy or redirect the meteor with human-made power. Others involve Rayquaza, the ancient solution, the mythic safeguard. This conflict is subtle but important. It shows that even after witnessing legendary Pokémon reshape the world, humans still struggle to accept that they cannot solve everything alone. The Delta episode becomes a kind of test for humanity's humility. Will people trust the ancient balance? Will they respect the role of legendary Pokémon as guardians? Or will they insist on using their own tools, their own machines, their own plans, even if those plans risk making things worse? Zinnia believes the answer is clear. Rayquaza is the solution. The Draconid traditions exist for this reason. The Sky Guardian must rise. The meteor must be stopped by the being that lives where the meteor is coming from. But not everyone agrees, and that disagreement creates tension, because time is running out. The meteor does not slow down because humans argue. It continues its silent approach. As the hero trainer becomes involved, the Delta episode begins to feel like a story of trust. Trust in legends, trust in ancient knowledge, trust in Rayquaza. The hero has already witnessed the Weather Trio's power. They have already seen how balance is restored by the Sky Guardian, so they are uniquely positioned to accept this plan. They know Rayquaza is real. They know it can act. And they know that if anyone can stop something from space, it is the Pokémon that lives closest to space itself. When the moment finally comes, Rayquaza is summoned again, and the Sky Pillar becomes the stage for one of the most dramatic scenes in Hoenn's history. The Sky Pillar is ancient, weathered, and quiet, a structure that feels like it has been waiting for this moment for thousands of years. Climbing it again feels different now. Before, it was a desperate climb to stop Kyogre and Groudon. Now, it is a climb to prevent the planet's destruction from above. The stakes feel larger, but the atmosphere is calmer, almost sacred. The world is not screaming with storms or burning with heat. It is simply waiting. At the top of the Sky Pillar, Rayquaza appears with the same overwhelming presence as before, but now its purpose is clearer than ever. Rayquaza is not here to mediate. It is here to defend. And when it mega evolves, it feels like the sky itself is transforming with it, as if the atmosphere is sharpening into a weapon. Then Rayquaza ascends. It rises beyond the clouds, beyond the blue of the sky, into the thin darkness of the upper atmosphere. The world below becomes small. Hoenn's oceans and mountains become tiny shapes. The region that once seemed like everything becomes just one part of a planet hanging in space. This perspective shift is important because it reminds you that the Weather Trio's story, while rooted in Hoenn, is part of something bigger. The planet is fragile, the world is vulnerable, and the legendary Pokémon are not just regional guardians. They are part of the planet's defense. Rayquaza meets the meteor in the sky, and this moment is the ultimate expression of Rayquaza's role. It is not simply a powerful dragon battling for glory. It is the Sky Guardian throwing itself against an extinction-level threat. It is the planet's immune system responding to a foreign object. It is the ancient balance of the world defending itself against something that does not belong. The meteor is shattered, but the story does not end there, because the Delta episode introduces another layer of mystery: Deoxys. Deoxys, a Pokémon born from a virus exposed to a laser beam, tied directly to space and the meteor's origin, appears as a final encounter. Its presence adds an eerie sense that space itself is not empty, that threats and mysteries exist beyond the planet's atmosphere. Deoxys is not simply a random legendary Pokémon. It is a reminder that the world is connected to the cosmos, and that Rayquaza's duty may extend far beyond what anyone in Hoenn fully understands. In the aftermath of the Delta episode, Hoenn's view of Rayquaza changes even further. It is no longer just the balance between sea and land. It is the defender against the sky's dangers, the guardian not only of weather, but of the planet's survival. The Draconid people's traditions are validated once again, not only because Rayquaza descended to stop Kyogre and Groudon, but because it rose to stop a meteor. Their knowledge is not superstition. It is the memory of the world's safeguards. And when everything is over, the world becomes quiet again. The meteor is gone, the sky is safe, the ocean is calm, the land is stable. Hoenn returns to peace, but that peace now carries a deeper awareness. The region has survived not one, but multiple threats that could have ended it. It has seen the sea rise, the land burn, and the sky nearly fall. And each time, the ancient guardian answered. The Weather Trio timeline, through the Delta episode, becomes a complete mythic cycle. The world is threatened, balance is broken, the guardian responds, and peace returns. But the story also leaves behind a quiet truth. The world is always vulnerable. The ocean and land will always have their tension. The sky will always hold unknown dangers. And somewhere above it all, Rayquaza will continue to watch, drifting through the ozone layer, silent and distant, ready to rise again if the world ever needs it. Because in Hoenn, the greatest power is not domination. It is protection, it is balance, and it is the sky answering when everything else fails. When the storms have passed and the skies have cleared, when the oceans settle and the land stops trembling, there is always a strange quiet that follows. It isn't the peaceful quiet of an ordinary day. It's the kind of quiet that feels earned, like the world has exhaled after holding its breath for too long. In Hoenn, after the awakening of Kyogre and Groudon, after Rayquaza's descent, and after the Delta episode's cosmic threat, that quiet becomes part of the region's identity. It is the sound of survival, the sound of balance returning, the sound of nature agreeing, at least for now, to coexist with itself. The Weather Trio timeline is often remembered as a series of dramatic events, but what makes it truly powerful is what it leaves behind. It changes the way people understand the world. It turns myths into history. It transforms legendary Pokémon from distant rumors into living proof that the planet itself is guarded by forces beyond human control. And as time moves forward, Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza become more than legendary Pokémon hidden away in deep caves or high towers. They become symbols. They become the shapes of nature's greatest truths. Kyogre, in its simplest form, represents the ocean, not just the physical water that fills Hoenn's routes and harbors, but the idea of water as life and as overwhelming force. The sea is nurturing, but it is also endless. It gives food, it carries ships, it supports ecosystems that humans rarely see. Yet it can also swallow coastlines and erase entire landscapes. Kyogre's story captures that duality perfectly. It is not evil, and it is not kind. It is simply the sea's will, the ocean's instinct to expand, to cover, to reclaim. In Hoenn, the ocean is everywhere. It defines the region's geography. It shapes its culture. It determines its travel, its trade, its lifestyle. So it makes sense that Hoenn's great myth includes a legendary Pokémon that embodies the sea itself. Kyogre's presence in the timeline reminds the region that the ocean is never fully conquered. Even in times of calm, the sea remains powerful enough to become catastrophic if pushed too far. The water can always rise again, and when it does not ask permission. Growldon represents the land in the same way, not just the dirt and rock beneath your feet, but the idea of land as stability, space, and survival. Humans build on land. They plant crops in soil. They raise cities on solid ground. Land feels permanent, dependable, like something you can trust. But Growldon's story reveals that land is not as stable as it seems. The earth can shift, the ground can rise, heat can emerge from beneath the surface and turn fertile regions into harsh landscapes. The land can expand and claim territory just as aggressively as the sea. Growldon's myth reminds Hoenn that the earth is alive in its own way, that mountains are not eternal, that continents are not fixed, that the ground beneath you is part of a larger system that can change. In the Weather Trio timeline, Growldon is not simply a Pokémon that causes drought. It is the land's desire to assert itself, to rise, to spread. It represents the idea that nature's stability is often an illusion, and that the earth can become just as destructive as the ocean if imbalance takes hold. And then there is Rayquaza, the sky's guardian, the balance that stands above both. Rayquaza is often treated like the hero of the Weather Trio story because it is the one that ends the conflict. But Rayquaza's role is more complicated than heroism. It is not a savior in the human sense. It does not protect the world because it loves humans. It protects the world because balance must exist. Rayquaza is the sky's enforcement, the final correction when the sea and land become too extreme. Rayquaza represents something that is easy to overlook in daily life: the atmosphere itself. The sky is not empty. It is not just a backdrop. It is a living system of pressure, wind, weather, and energy. It is the space where storms are born and where sunlight is filtered into warmth. Rayquaza embodies that system. It lives in the ozone layer, a place humans cannot reach naturally, and that distance makes it feel like a god watching from above. When Rayquaza descends, it is the sky deciding to act, the atmosphere refusing to allow the planet to be torn apart. In Hoenn's mythology, Rayquaza's presence is the reason the world can survive Kyogre and Growldon. Without Rayquaza, the conflict between sea and land would not end. It would only escalate until one force became absolute. Rayquaza is the reminder that nature is not only chaotic, but also self-correcting. That balance exists not as a peaceful agreement, but as an enforced rule. And when balance is threatened, something will respond. This is one of the most fascinating themes in the Weather Trio timeline. The idea that the world has safeguards, that the planet is not helpless, even when humans make mistakes. Kyogre and Growldon represent forces that can destroy, but Rayquaza represents the force that prevents total collapse. In the Delta episode, that theme becomes even stronger because Rayquaza's role expands beyond Hoenn and beyond weather. It becomes the defender against cosmic threats, a guardian not only of balance, but of survival itself. When you look at the Weather Trio story this way, it becomes less like a simple Pokémon plot and more like a mythological system. Kyogre and Growldon are like opposing gods, each essential but dangerous in excess. Rayquaza is the mediator, the law that keeps them in check. And humans exist beneath these forces, small but not meaningless. Humans can disturb balance, but they can also restore it through knowledge, respect, and courage. That is why the Draconid people matter so much in the timeline. They represent the human side of the myth, the ones who preserve understanding across generations. They are proof that humans are not completely powerless. They cannot defeat Kyogre and Growldon through strength, but they can remember, they can prepare, they can build structures like the Sky Pillar. They can pass down traditions that teach future generations how to call Rayquaza when the world breaks. Their role is not domination, it is stewardship, and stewardship is the true lesson of Hoenn. Because the villain teams, Team Aqua and Team Magma, are not defeated simply because they are weak. They are defeated because they misunderstand the world. They believe they can reshape nature like an engineer reshapes a machine. They believe they can awaken a god and control it. Their ideologies begin with concerns that sound almost reasonable: protect the oceans, expand the land, but their solution is catastrophic because it ignores balance. They are the cautionary tale in the Weather Trio timeline, a reminder that even good intentions can become disaster when paired with arrogance. In the aftermath of these events, Hoenn becomes a region that carries myth and reality side by side. Trainers still battle, gym leaders still test challengers. The Pokémon League still stands as a symbol of mastery. Life continues. But beneath that everyday world, there is an awareness that nature is bigger than the human story. That legendary Pokémon are not simply rare trophies. They are the world's foundations, sleeping beneath the surface, waiting. This is why the Weather Trio story never truly ends. Even after Kyogre and Groudon return to slumber, their existence remains a potential future crisis. The orbs still exist. Ancient energy still exists. Human curiosity still exists. And as long as those things remain, the possibility of imbalance remains as well. The world can always tilt again. The sea can rise again. The land can burn again. The sky can be forced to answer again. In many ways, this is what makes the Weather Trio so perfect for a sleep video timeline. Their story moves like a slow cycle. It begins with calm. It builds into tension. It erupts into crisis. It resolves through balance. And then it returns to calm, but with the understanding that calm is not permanent, only maintained. It is a rhythm that mirrors the natural world itself. Seasons change. Storms come and go. The ocean rises and falls. The earth shifts over time. Balance is always temporary, always moving, always alive. And even outside of Hoenn, the Weather Trio's legacy continues through the way Pokémon fans and researchers within the world think about legendary Pokémon. Kyogre and Groudon become examples of primal power, proof that the planet itself has living embodiments. Rayquaza becomes proof that the sky is not empty and that cosmic threats are real. Deoxys, appearing after the meteor is destroyed, becomes a reminder that the universe holds mysteries beyond the planet, and that the Pokémon world is part of something much larger. In the quietest sense, the Weather Trio story also becomes a lesson about humility. Humans can train Pokémon, build cities, create technology, and explore the world, but they are not above nature. They live within it, they depend on it, and when they forget that, the world has ways of reminding them, sometimes gently, through storms and droughts that encourage caution, sometimes violently, through awakenings that shake the region to its core. Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza are the ultimate reminder of that truth. They are not enemies to be conquered, they are not tools to be used, they are forces to be respected. And when they awaken, the world itself changes, because they are part of the world's deepest structure. So even when the timeline seems complete, even when the crisis has ended and the skies are clear, the Weather Trio remain present in the background of Hoenn's identity. The ocean still stretches wide. The land still rises in mountains. The sky still arches overhead, endless and watchful. And somewhere beneath the waves, Kyogre sleeps. Somewhere beneath the earth, Groudon rests. Somewhere above the clouds, Rayquaza drifts through the ozone layer, silent and distant. Not because the story is finished, but because the world is always waiting for its next imbalance. And if that day ever comes again, if the sea and land begin to fight once more, the sky will answer once more, balance will return once more, and Hoenn, as it always has, will endure.